She came alone, wearing her husband's old military jacket. The staff took one look and decided she didn't belong. Security guards gripped her arms, escorting her out as other families watched. She clutched a small wrapped box meant for her son's graduation day. What she didn't know was that inside that auditorium, a row of Navy SEALs were about to send a message no one would forget. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story touched you, please consider subscribing to support more stories that honor the unsung heroes among us. Martha Wilson's weathered pickup truck rumbled into the parking lot of the Naval Academy, its engine sputtering slightly before falling silent. She sat for a moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel, taking in the scene around her. Luxury cars gleamed in the afternoon sun, Mercedes, BMWs, even a Jaguar with government plates, her 1994 Ford F-150 with its peeling paint and rust spots along the wheel wells seemed to shrink in their presence. Just breathe, she whispered to herself. This is Jay's day. She checked her appearance in the rearview mirror at 58. Life had etched its story across her face, law lines around her eyes, furrows across her brow from years of worry, skin weathered from working outdoors. She'd done her best with her appearance today, applying a touch of lipstick and pulling her graying hair into a neat bun. But it was the jacket that gave her pause. The olive green military jacket had belonged to her husband, James, too large for her frame. It hung on her shoulders like an embrace from the past. The fabric was worn at the elbows, and the patches, including the distinctive SEAL Team insignia, had faded with time, but wearing it made her feel like James was with her today, watching their son graduate at the top of his class. Martha fingered the wedding ring that hung from a chain around her neck. We made it, James. Our boy made it. She stepped out of the truck, smoothing down the jacket and retrieving a small, carefully wrapped gift box from the passenger seat. Inside was James' graduation watch, the only family heirloom she had to pass on to their son. 20 years of raising John alone, working multiple jobs, scrimping and saving had all led to this moment. Around her family's informal attire flowed toward the grand entrance of the auditorium. Women in elegant dresses and men in tailored suits moved with confidence, many adorned with the subtle indicators of wealth: designer handbags, gold, watches, pearls. Martha felt their glances, some curious, some dismissive, but she kept her chin up, clutching her invitation in one hand and the present in the other. The grand steps leading to the entrance were intimidating, but Martha climbed them with determination. Security guards flanked the doors, checking invitations and offering directions to the arriving guests. As Martha approached, their conversation halted, and their expressions shifted from professional friendliness to wary assessment. Invitation, ma'am, one asked, his tone already doubtful. Martha presented her invitation with a smile. I'm here for Lieutenant John Wilson. His mother. The guard studied the invitation, then Martha's appearance, his eyes lingering on the oversized military jacket. I'll need you to wait over here while I verify this. Martha nodded and stepped to the side as indicated. She watched as other families streamed past without question, their invitations barely glanced at before they were waved through with a smile. The minutes ticked by on the large clock above the entrance. 5 minutes, 10:15. Finally, a woman in a crisp navy blazer approached, clipboard in hand. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, and her expression was coolly professional. Mrs. Wilson, she asked, glancing down at her clipboard. Yes, that's me, Martha replied, hope rising. Is everything all right with my invitation? The woman's eyes scanned Martha from head to toe, lingering on the worn military jacket with visible disapproval. The invitation itself is valid, but I'm afraid we have dress code policy for this ceremony. Martha's smile faltered. I'm sorry, this is a formal military graduation, Mrs. Wilson. Your attire isn't appropriate for this occasion. Martha's hand instinctively moved to touch the sleeve of the jacket. This was my husband's jacket. He was killed in Desert Storm. Our son John. Policy is policy. The coordinator cut her off, her voice clipped. We have standards to maintain. I can't make exceptions. Before Martha could respond further, security guards materialized beside her, seemingly summoned by some invisible signal. Please escort Mrs. Wilson out, the coordinator instructed them quickly and quietly. But my son is graduating today, Martha protested, her voice rising slightly as panic set in. He's the valedictorian. I've driven 8 hours to be here. The guards each took one of her arms firmly, but not roughly. Ma'am, please don't make a scene. Families passing by turned to watch the commotion, some whispering behind raised hands, others averting their eyes in discomfort. Martha felt her face burning with embarrassment as she was led toward the exit. My son won't understand, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Please just let me explain to someone. I can wait somewhere until the ceremony starts. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. As they neared the doors, Martha caught a sight of a military officer. Noticing the distinctive SEAL Team patch on her jacket's shoulder, his eyes widened slightly in recognition, but by the time he processed what he was seeing, Martha had already been escorted outside. The guards released her arms once they were outside, their duty completed. You can retrieve your vehicle from the parking lot, ma'am, one said, his voice softer now that they were away from his superiors. I'm sorry about this. Martha stood on the steps watching as the doors closed in front of her. The enormity of what had just happened washed over her. She would miss her only son's graduation. She wouldn't hear his valedictorian speech. She wouldn't see him receive his commission, she found her way to a stone bench in the courtyard and sat down, the small gift box clutched in her hands. The watch inside had been James's pride and possession. He'd received it from his own father upon graduating from the academy. And now Martha wouldn't be able to continue the tradition. Two older couples walked past her, heading toward the entrance. One of the women glanced at Martha, then whispered something to her husband. Martha looked down at her hands, focusing on the gift box to keep the tears at bay. Inside the auditorium, rows of seats filled with proud families, cameras and phones ready to capture the momentous occasion. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation as military officials took their places on the stage. In the front row, a line of distinguished-looking men sat straight back and serious. The SEAL instructors and veterans who had overseen the training of this year's graduates. Commander Thomas Hayes approached the podium with practiced military precision. His uniform was impeccable, medals gleaming under the lights. Ladies and gentlemen, we gather today to honor the exceptional men and women who have completed one of the most demanding training programs in the United States military. His voice carried through the large space, commanding respect and attention. The audience settled, conversations dying down as the ceremony officially began. These candidates have endured physical and mental challenges beyond what most civilians can imagine. They have proven themselves worthy of joining the elite ranks of our naval special warfare community. In the front row, Master Chief Ramirez, a veteran SEAL with 30 years of service, sat listening. His weathered face remained impassive, but his eyes were alert, taking in every detail of his surroundings. So Hobart formed through decades of operations where vigilance meant survival. It is my distinct honor to introduce this year's valedictorian, Commander Hayes, continued Lieutenant John Wilson, who has set records in every phase of SEAL training and exemplifies the very best qualities we seek in our special operators. The audience applauded as a tall, confident young man in dress whites approached the podium. John Wilson moved with the fluid grace of an athlete, his posture perfect, his expression serious but composed. As he faced the crowd, his eyes began methodically scanning the audience, moving row by row through the seats. Master Chief Ramirez noticed the slight tension in the young lieutenant's jaw, the subtle furrow between his brows. As his surge continued without success, something was wrong. John cleared his throat and began his address, his voice strong and clear despite the barely perceptible concern in his expression. Distinguished guests, commanding officers, fellow graduates and family, he said, pausing slightly on the last word as his eyes made one more sweep across the audience. It is an honor to stand before you today representing the class of 2025. Outside, Martha remained on the bench, staring at the closed doors of the auditorium. She could faintly hear the amplified voice from inside, though the words were indistinct. She checked her watch. The ceremony had begun. John would be speaking soon, if not already. Wondering where his mother was, she thought about leaving, driving the 8 hours back to their small town in Ohio. What was the point of staying? But something kept her rooted to that bench. She had promised John she would be here. Even if she couldn't be inside, she would wait and perhaps catch him afterward. Back at the podium, John had moved into the substance of his speech. Everything I am today I owe to two people: my father, who gave his life for this country, and my mother, who worked 3 jobs to raise me after he was gone. Master Chief Ramirez's attention sharpened at these words, his gaze fixed on the young lieutenant. My father taught me about duty through his sacrifice, John continued, but my mother taught me about perseverance through her daily example. She never asked for recognition, never complained about the hardships, and never stopped believing in me. John paused again, longer, this time his discomfort now visible to anyone paying close attention. She promised she would be here today in the front row. Master Chief Ramirez's eyes narrowed as he made the connection. Without drawing attention, he quietly stood and slipped out of the outside door, drawing curious glances from his SEAL colleagues outside. Ramirez found Martha still sitting on the bench, staring at the closed doors of the venue, the small gift box balanced on her knees. Mrs. Wilson, he asked, approaching carefully. Martha looked up, surprised. Yes, I'm Master Chief Ramirez. He came closer, his eyes moving to the jacket she wore, recognition dawning in his expression. Jim's jacket still looks good on you. Martha's eyes widened. You knew James? He saved my life in '91. Ramirez's voice softened with respect. Operation Red Wing, we never forgot. Martha stood slowly, clutching the gift box. John mentioned a Master Chief who told stories about his father. That was you? Ramirez nodded, then gestured to the doors. Why aren't you inside? Your son is giving his speech right now. When Martha explained what had happened, Ramirez's face darkened, the relaxed lines of his expression hardening into something formidable. Without another word, he helped her to her feet and escorted her back to the entrance, where the same security guards began to step forward, recognition and alarm crossing their faces. She's with me, Ramirez stated in a tone that broke no argument. The guards immediately stood aside, their protests dying before they could be voiced. As they entered the side door of the auditorium, Martha could hear her son's voice clearly now, speaking about honor and commitment about the values that defined the path he had chosen. Ramirez guided her to stand just inside the entrance, out of sight of the main audience, but where she could see her son at the podium, tall and straight, and so much like his father that tears sprang to her eyes. Inside the grand auditorium, the ceremony continued with polished military precision. Rows of seats filled with proud families faced the stage where naval officers in their dress uniforms stood. At parade rest, light glinted off brass buttons and medals as Commander Hayes continued his introductory remarks. John Wilson stood tall at the podium, his dress whites, crisp and perfect, but his eyes betrayed a subtle unease as they continued to scan the audience. He was midway through his valedictorian speech, his voice strong and confident despite the growing concern he felt. The SEAL ethos teaches us that loyalty is a foundation of our character, John said, his gaze still searching the crowd. We do not leave our teammates behind, ever. This principle extends beyond the battlefield to our families and communities. In the wings of the stage, Master Chief Ramirez had quietly returned from his mission outside. He caught John's eye briefly and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Something in the young lieutenant's shoulders relaxed slightly, though his audience would never have noticed the change. Ramirez made his way back to his seat in the front row, leaning over to whisper to the other SEAL instructors and veterans seated there one by one. Their expressions hardened as the message was passed down the line. Commander Hayes watched this subtle communication with curiosity, but maintained his composed demeanor as John continued his address. My father once told my mother that courage isn't about being fearless, John said, his voice taking on a new depth of emotion. It's about moving forward despite your fear. My mother embodied that lesson every day after we lost him, working multiple jobs, keeping our home together, never letting me see how hard it must have been. In the rear of the auditorium, Martha stood quietly with Master Chief Ramirez, tears welling in her eyes as she listened to her son's words. The gift box was clutched tightly in her hands, her fingers tracing its edges nervously. Will you get in trouble for bringing me in? She whispered to Ramirez. The Master Chief's weathered face softened slightly. Mrs. Wilson, there are different kinds of rules. Some are written in books, others are written in blood. Your husband's sacrifice earned you the right to be here. The rest is just bureaucracy. On stage, John was building to the conclusion of his speech, unaware that his mother was now present. As we graduate today and prepare to face whatever challenges await us, I want to acknowledge that we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, those who paid the ultimate price like my father, and those who carried on like my mother, who taught me that true strength is found in resilience and unwavering commitment. John paused, his gaze sweeping the audience one final time. She promised she would be here today, and if there's one thing she taught me, it's that she always keeps her promises. The subtle strain in his voice was detectable only to those who knew him well. Commander Hayes exchanged a glance with the ceremony coordinator who stood at the side of the stage, her clipboard clutched to her chest. Something's wrong, Hayes murmured. Where is Lieutenant Wilson's mother? The coordinator's face remained professionally blank. I'm not certain, sir. Back in the front row, something unprecedented was happening, starting with Master Chief Ramirez, the SEAL. Instructors and veterans began to rise from their seats in perfect unison, a synchronized movement that could only come from men accustomed to operating as a single unit. The action was so sudden and so coordinated that John stopped mid-sentence. The audience, confused by this deviation from protocol, fell completely silent. Some turned in their seats, trying to see what had captured the attention of these decorated warriors. All of the SEALs now stood at attention, facing not the stage but the rear doors of the auditorium. Their faces were impassive, but their message was unmistakable. Commander Hayes stepped forward, bewildered but maintaining his composure. Master Chief, what is the meaning of this? Sorry for the interruption, sir, Ramirez responded, his voice carrying in the silent room. But there's been a dishonorable action taken against the family of one of our brothers. The ceremony coordinator rushed forward, her professional demeanor cracking for the first time. Commander, this is disrupting the entire ceremony. I must insist that that woman you removed. Ramirez cut in, his voice deceptively calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel, is Lieutenant Wilson's mother. Her husband died wearing that jacket on a classified mission with us 20 years ago. The same jacket you found too shabby for your ceremony. The coordinator pulled as every eye in the auditorium turned toward her. Commander Hayes' expression darkened as he processed this information. Bring her in, Hayes ordered immediately, his voice leaving no room for debate. With full honors at the rear of the auditorium, Martha stood frozen in place, overwhelmed by what was unfolding. The SEALs remained standing, all eyes on the doors where she stood, partially hidden. They're all standing for you, Mrs. Wilson, Ramirez said quietly. For you and for Jim. I don't understand, Martha whispered, her voice trembling. Your husband was one of us. We protect our own, we honor our fallen, and we never forget the families they leave behind. Ramirez offered her his arm. Are you ready? Martha nodded, took a deep breath, and placed her hand on the Master Chief's arm. Together, they stepped into full view at the center of the doorway. Ripple of murmurs swept through the audience as they processed the weathered woman in the oversized military jacket, being escorted by one of the most decorated SEALs in the room. From the stage, John's eyes widened in recognition and confusion. Mom, he said into the microphone, his composure slipping for the first time to junior officers. quickly moved to Martha's side, flanking her as formal escorts. Ramirez stepped back with a nod, returning to his position in the front row as Martha was guided down the center aisle. As she walked, each seal she passed rendered a solemn corridor of honor for the woman who had sacrificed so much. The audience, now understanding what had happened, rose to their feet as well, many wiping away tears as the story became clear through whispered explanations that spread quickly through the rows. At the podium, John broke protocol, stepping away to meet his mother halfway down the aisle. When they embraced, the applause started, spontaneous and heartfelt, washing over them in waves. "You came," John whispered, his composure momentarily forgotten. "I promised I would," Martha replied, her voice steady despite her tears. Commander Hayes descended from the stage to personally escort Martha to the seat of honor in the front row, a seat that had been reserved for her all along but had remained conspicuously empty. As John returned to the podium, he stood taller, emotion clear in his eyes, but his posture straight and proud. "As I was saying," he continued with new strength in his voice, "true strength isn't about appearances or rank, it's about sacrifice, perseverance, and honor, values my parents taught me long before I joined this brotherhood." He finished his speech to thunderous applause, his eyes now fixed on his mother's proud face in the front row. The remainder of the ceremony proceeded with perfect military precision. When John received his commission, Martha stood, the small gift box clutched in her hands, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The SEAL instructors nodded in quiet acknowledgement as John passed them a silent confirmation of their acceptance of James Wilson's son into their ranks. After the ceremony concluded, families flooded toward their graduates, cameras flashing, embraces exchanged. Martha hung back, overwhelmed by the crowd and the emotions of the day. "Mrs. Wilson," a voice called. She turned to find Commander Hayes approaching, his expression solemn. "Commander," she acknowledged, suddenly nervous, "I want to personally apologize for the misunderstanding earlier today," he said formally. "It was a grave oversight and it will be addressed." Martha nodded, unsure how to respond to this high-ranking officer. "Your husband's service was exemplary," Hayes continued, "and your son has followed admirably in his footsteps. You should be very proud." "I am," Martha said simply. "Every day." Hayes nodded and moved away as John approached, now surrounded by his classmates who were eager to meet the woman whose story had become the unexpected focal point of their graduation day. "Mom," John said, his formal demeanor softening as he reached her side, "I want you to meet everyone." Martha found herself at the center of a group of young officers, all showing her genuine respect and curiosity. The initial discomfort she had felt at the entrance seemed a lifetime ago. "Lieutenant Wilson tells us you drove 8 hours to be here, ma'am," one of Jay's classmates said. "I would have walked if necessary," Martha replied with a small smile as the crowd began to disperse. Martha finally had a moment alone with her son. She held out the small gift box that she had been carrying all day. "This was your father's," she explained as John carefully unwrapped it. "He received it from his father when he graduated. Now, it's yours." John opened the box to reveal a vintage military watch, its face still ticking after all these years. He lifted it reverently, turning it over to see his father's initials engraved on the back. "Dad never told me about this," John said softly. "He was saving it for this day." Martha helped him fasten it to his wrist. "He would be so proud of you, John, so very proud." Before John could respond, they were approached by Master Chief Ramirez and several other veteran SEALs. "Lieutenant Wilson," Ramirez said formally, then broke into a rare smile. "Your father would indeed be proud, not just of your accomplishments, but of how you honored him and your mother today." John straightened instinctively. "Thank you, Master Chief." "Mrs. Wilson," Ramirez continued, turning to Martha, "there's something we'd like to do if you'll permit us." Martha looked at him questioningly. "That jacket you're wearing," Ramirez explained, "it belonged to one of our brothers. We'd like to update it if we may." One of the other SEALs stepped forward, holding a new patch in his hand, the current SEAL team insignia but with a small gold star in the corner indicating family of a fallen operator. "This identifies you as family," Ramirez explained. "It would be an honor if you would allow us to add it to Jim's jacket." Martha's eyes welled with tears again as she nodded. "James would be honored." As a SEAL carefully attached the new patch to the shoulder of the jacket, Martha felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, so weight she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying all these years. The sense of isolation of being the one left behind to carry on alone began to dissolve as she stood, surrounded by her husband's brothers-in-arms and her son's new family. "You've never been alone, Mrs. Wilson," Ramirez said quietly as if reading her thoughts. "Not really, we just haven't been good at showing it until today." The ceremony coordinator approached hesitantly, her earlier confidence notably diminished. She glanced nervously at the SEALs surrounding Martha before addressing her directly. "Mrs. Wilson, I must offer my sincerest apologies for earlier. It was an inexcusable error in judgment on my part." Martha studied the woman for a moment before responding. "We all make mistakes. Today has turned out beautifully despite it." The coordinator nodded gratefully and retreated, visibly relieved to have escaped without a harsher rebuke. "Mom, there's a reception for graduates and families," John said. "Would you like to attend?" Martha glanced down at her simple clothes and the old jacket now bearing its new patch. "Are you sure I'm dressed appropriately, John?" smiled, placing his arm around her shoulders. "Mom, you're wearing the uniform of love and sacrifice. There's nothing more appropriate than that." As they walked toward the reception hall, Martha Wilson walked taller than she had in years, her son on one side and her husband's legacy surrounding her. The jacket that had once seemed out of place now felt like a memorial symbol, not of what she had lost, but of what she had been part of all along. The reception hall buzzed with conversation and laughter as graduates and their families celebrated the momentous day. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the elegant space, and uniform servers circulated with trays of champagne and Oruvis. Martha Wilson stood beside her son John, still wearing James's jacket, with its new patch feeling both out of place and strangely at home. "Lieutenant Wilson, congratulations," a senior officer said, approaching them with his wife. "Your speech was exceptional." "Thank you, sir," John replied with perfect military courtesy. "May I introduce my mother, Martha Wilson?" The officer turned to Martha with genuine respect. "Mrs. Wilson, it's an honor to meet you. Your son has set records in our program that I suspect will stand for many years." Martha smiled, warmed by the pride in her son's accomplishments. "He's always been determined ever since he was small." As the conversation continued, Martha noticed several people glancing at her jacket, their expressions curious but no longer judgmental. The new patch seemed to have transformed how people perceived her. Perhaps it was the way she carried herself now, with a new confidence. Across the room, Master Chief Ramirez stood with a group of SEALs, periodically glancing in her direction, as if keeping watch. When their eyes met, he raised his glass in a subtle salute. "Mom," John said, drawing her attention back, "there are some people I'd like you to meet." He guided her through the crowd toward a cluster of young officers in dressed whites. As they approached, the group parted to reveal an older man in a wheelchair, his chest adorned with medals that spoke of a lifetime of service. "Mom, this is Admiral Peterson," John said. He was Dad's commanding officer. Martha felt her heart skip a beat. In 20 years, she had met very few people who had actually known James during his service. The Navy had been tight-lipped about his missions, his death classified to the point where she had received minimal detail. "Mrs. Wilson," the Admiral said, his voice gruff but kind, "I've been looking forward to meeting you for a very long time." "Admiral," Martha replied, unsure what to say next. "Your husband was one of the finest men I ever commanded," Peterson continued, "and now your son carries on that legacy. You must be very proud." "I am," Martha said simply. "Of both of them." The Admiral's eyes moved to the jacket she wore, recognition flashing across his face. "James's jacket, I remember it well." Martha touched the sleeve self-consciously. "Makes me feel close to him. I hope it's not inappropriate for me to wear it." "Inappropriate?" The Admiral's eyebrows rose. "Mrs. Wilson, that jacket has been to places and seen operations that even I don't have clearance to know about. If anyone has earned the right to wear it, it's you." A young aide appeared at the Admiral's side, whispering something in his ear. Admiral nodded and turned back to Martha. "Mrs. Wilson, would you and John join me in the small meeting room? There are some other people who would very much like to speak with you." Curious, Martha followed, as John wheeled the Admiral through a side door into a smaller, more private room. Inside, a group of men stood talking quietly, men of varying ages, but with the same unmistakable bearing that spoke of special operations training. As they entered, the room fell silent. One by one, the men turned to face Martha, their expressions solemn. "Mrs. Wilson," the Admiral began, "these men served with your husband on various missions throughout his career. Some were with him on his final operation. Due to the classified nature of their work, they've never been able to speak with you about him until today." Martha felt her knees weaken slightly, and John placed a steadying hand on her elbow. For 20 years, she had lived with unanswered questions about James' final days. She had raised their son on stories that ended abruptly, pieces of a life she could never fully explain. A man of about 60 stepped forward, his weathered face lined with both age and experience. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm Commander Reynolds, retired now. I was the team leader on Operation Kingfisher, James's last mission." Martha swallowed hard. "You were with him?" Reynolds nodded. "Until the end. There's something you should know. Something we couldn't tell you." Then he glanced at the Admiral, who nodded his permission. "James saved 14 hostages that day, including 3 children, and he saved every man on our team, including me. The official record states he died during an equipment malfunction while training." That was the cover story. Martha felt tears welling in her eyes as Reynolds continued. "The truth is, he died a hero. He drew enemy fire too, allowed the hostages to reach the extraction point. He knew the risk. He made the choice willingly." John's hand tightened on his mother's elbow. He had grown up believing his father had died in a training accident, a tragedy but not a sacrifice. "Why are you telling us now?" Martha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Admiral wheeled forward. "The operation was declassified last month. We've been trying to reach you, but the notification system failed. When I heard what had happened at the ceremony today, I realized we couldn't wait any longer." Another man stepped forward, this one younger, perhaps in his 40s. "Mrs. Wilson, I was a junior officer on that mission. I took this from the site." He held out a worn leather wallet. "I've carried it with me for 20 years, waiting for the day I could return it to his family." With trembling hands, Martha took the wallet. She opened it to find a faded photograph of herself and John as a small boy, smiling at the camera on the back. In James' handwriting my reason for coming home. He looked at that photo every night, the man said quietly. Martha closed her eyes, clutching the wallet to her chest. When she opened them again, she saw that everyone in the room had moved to standard attention. Mrs. Wilson, Reynolds said formally on behalf of a grateful nation and the men who served with your husband, we would like to present you with this. From behind him, another officer stepped forward with a small wooden box. Inside was a Navy Cross, the second highest military decoration that could be awarded to a member of the United States Navy. This was awarded Lee, but has been held in trust until Reynolds explained. It's now yours. Martha looked at her son, whose eyes shone with pride and unshed tears. It's yours too, she said softly, part of your father's legacy. John straightened his shoulders, looking so much like James that Martha's heart ached with the resemblance. I think Dad would want you to have it. Mom, you fought your own battles these past 20 years. The Admiral cleared his throat. If I may, there's one more thing. He gestured, and Master Chief Ramirez entered the room carrying a framed photograph. This was taken 2 weeks before Operation Kingfisher. The photo showed a group of SEALs in combat gear, arms around each other's shoulders. James Wilson at the center. They were dirty, tired, but unmistakably bound by something stronger than mere teamwork. This is why we stood up today, Ramirez said, handing the frame to Martha. Not just for James, but for you. You kept his memory alive. You raised his son to follow in his footsteps in our world that makes you family. Martha traced her finger over James' face in the photograph. I never knew this part of his life. He couldn't talk about his missions, his teammates, but he talked about you. Reynolds said all the time how strong you were, how you were the real hero in the family. The room fell silent as Martha absorbed these words. After the moment, she straightened her shoulders, adjusting James's jacket with newfound confidence. Thank you for this, she said. For all of it, for remembering him, and for being here for John. The Admiral nodded. We take care of our own, Mrs. Wilson. Always have. Always will. As they returned to the main reception, Martha felt different, lighter. Somehow, as if a weight she'd carried for 20 years had finally been lifted. The hidden parts of James' life, the questions that had haunted her, were finally answered. The reception was winding down, guests beginning to depart. John was drawn into conversation with his classmates one last time, leaving Martha standing alone by the tall windows overlooking the parade ground. It suits you, you know, a voice said behind her. Martha turned to find Commander Hayes approaching. What does Commander? The jacket, he gestured to James' old military jacket with its new patch, the way you wear it now, with pride. Martha smiled. I am proud, more than I can say. Hayes nodded. We're having a small ceremony tomorrow for the families of fallen operators. We'd be honored if you would attend as our special guest. I'd like that very much, Martha replied as Hayes moved away. John returned to her side, ready to go. Mom, the hotel's not far. Martha nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was after the emotional roller coaster of the day. As they walked through the nearly empty reception hall, their footsteps echoing on the marble floor, Martha spotted the ceremony coordinator standing by the door, her expression uncertain. The woman stepped forward as they approached. Mrs. Wilson, I wanted to apologize again for what happened earlier. There's no excuse for how you were treated. Martha studied the woman for a moment. 20 years of single motherhood had taught her about grace under pressure, about forgiveness, about choosing battles carefully. We all make mistakes, she said finally. Today has turned out to be more beautiful than I ever could have imagined, despite how it started. The coordinator's tense shoulders relaxed slightly. Thank you for your understanding. As they left the building and walked into the cool evening air, John placed an arm around his mother's shoulders. Where did that come from? I thought you might tell her off. Martha smiled. Your father used to say that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Besides, look what came from it all. I finally know the truth about your father. I met his teammates, and those SEALs standing up for me. That's a memory I'll keep forever. John nodded, guiding her toward the parking lot where her old truck waited. Speaking of the truck, I've been thinking now that I'm commissioned, maybe it's time we got you something newer. Martha laughed, the sound light and free. What? And give up Old Faithful? Never. As they reached the truck, Martha paused with her hand on the door, looking back at the grand building, glowing with lights. You know, for years, I felt like I didn't belong in your father's world, like I was somehow less than not good enough. Mum, that's not true, John protested. I know that now, Martha said softly. Today showed me that I've been part of this brotherhood all along. I just didn't know it in the distance. The academy bells began to chime, marking the hour. Martha turned back to her son, reaching up to straighten his collar in a gesture she'd performed countless times throughout his childhood. Your father would be so proud of you, she said, not just for your accomplishments but for the man you've become. John smiled. He'd be proud of both of us, Mom. As they drove away from the academy, Martha glanced in the rear-view mirror at the building receding in the distance. She thought about the day's journey from rejection to reconciliation, from outsider to honored guest, from bearing her husband's memory alone to discovering a brotherhood that had been there all along. The jacket she wore felt different now, like armor rather than a burden. The new patch caught the light as she turned onto the main road, a tangible reminder that she belonged, that she had always belonged. She thought about all the military mother figures who came before her, women who had maintained households, raised children, kept memories alive while their partners served, the quiet heroes whose stories were rarely told but whose strength formed the backbone of military Families everywhere tomorrow would bring a new ceremony, new connections, new understandings of James' legacy. But for tonight, Martha was content to drive through the gathering darkness with her son beside her, the old truck carrying them forward just as it had for the past 20 years, reliable, resilient, and ready for whatever came next. The road ahead stretched out before them, illuminated by the truck's headlights cutting through the night. Martha Wilson drove on, her husband's jacket warm around her shoulders, her son's future bright with promise, and her heart finally at peace.